Okay, here we are. I'm gonna try to not make this a boring tutorial. This is mainly just I'm showcasing my method for making racetracks for games like anti-gravity racers and the sort. I've also used this method a lot in Spark the Electric Jester 3. So just gonna be showing how it works. Truth to be told, this version of Blender is not the main version that I use. This is a newer version of Blender. I like to use a much older version of Blender, much older, because I just prefer it. I also have the control scheme and the UI set to my personal preferences. For example, this bar over here is usually at the top. But anyways, let's try getting into my method for making tracks. So first of all, we're gonna start with the default cube over here. Let's just make a basic track mesh, and usually use like a loop cut. Whoops. And we can just push those up a bit. And then we have a quote-unquote racetrack. I like to remove these sides over here. Also, I can't teach people how to do stuff in Blender. I'm only gonna teach my methods. I like to optimize things a little bit. In this case, I gotta merge by distance to get those vertices removed. Let me remove backface culling. Yeah. Anyways, I was in the wrong window. So let me also. Okay, so now we have a little track piece, and I want to add texture to it because there's gonna be something we're gonna need to do. So I suppose since this is a newer version of Blender, we need to add materials. So I can just reuse this. I already have a material set up over here. And I'm just gonna grab stuff from XF. Okay, so here we are with the texture already added. So first I'm going to just try to make sure that the UV fits. Okay, so now here we have the UVs already set up with the material. This is only one texture, as you can see over here. Everything's mapped a little weirdly, but everything it's like mapped so it sort of looks like it makes sense. I didn't really bother with the bottom part of it. I'm just gonna make it this section of the road, just so it looks like it's, not the track itself, just the bottom part. But I don't really have to worry about that part. I'm also gonna extend the length a little bit. And then I'm gonna try adding some loop cuts. And usually that's done mostly over the track's surface, but you don't really need to do it anywhere else. One thing you might want to do, this isn't entirely necessary, is to add a subdivision surface modifier in simple mode. You can't really see the results of it no matter how much we add to it. So we add a triangulate modifier, and now we can actually see what our subsurface modifier is doing. But then, after all that, we're gonna get a decimate modifier, and as you can probably tell, it does reduce the poly count, but it looks ugly, and our UVs are all fucked up, right? So sometimes they're not, but they usually are. So we go to planar mode, and we set this to something like 1 degree. And in this case, if we look at our mesh now, wow, let me move this over here. It's like very little polygons. Granted, as soon as we start moving this mesh around, let me grab a bit of it and using proportional editing and just move it around, suddenly there will be more polygons. But still, and in this case, let's also shade smooth. And now everything looks a little weird. In this new version of Blender, I believe you have to use a modifier. It's smooth by angle, I believe. We can add that to all the way to the end. And I don't know, maybe make this something like 50 degrees. But yeah, now everything should work correctly. Now, how to make, like I'm going to, as for now, deactivate this modifier. But here's how we make a road out of this. First, I'm going to add something to it that's gonna screw it up a little bit in the future. I'm gonna be adding new materials, so let me skip that. Okay, so I've added a new material, and as you can see, when I go to edit mode, suddenly the texture disappears. This is an issue that I found with the decimate modifier, and the way to fix it that I have found is to take this part and lower it down, creating a little bit of an asymmetry. Now, even here, it's screwing it up. So maybe I would want to take this part over here and move it down a little bit. Oh, even then it's not working. Yeah, so sometimes this is just somewhat of an issue that happens. Sometimes what I would do is to add more to this. Granted, at the end of the day, the best thing that I suggest is to just make this road out of one big texture instead of using multiple. But sometimes I can't help it. I like to mess and use different materials. But yeah, if we change the mesh now to be something like this, granted this auto smoothing is being applied, which isn't good, but it's fine. Now suddenly we have, a more intricate mesh, and the modifier is not going to interfere like it was when it was aligned, and then the UVs get all wrong. This is just a part of the work. But anyways, so here we're gonna actually make the track. So first of all, we add an array modifier. We make it so it's going in the front. We also click on merge, so it's actually merged with this in the front. As long as this is perfectly straight, it's going to merge with it. And we can just increase the count. And by the way, yes, things are going to get slow. There's a lot of polygons we're messing with here, and you might want to deactivate the triangulate or the other modifiers. You might want to take them off. I'm just putting this move by angle at last. It's usually a good idea, but if you look things now, the decimate modifier should be applied after everything, but yeah, so actually, no, this isn't good. It shouldn't be doing that. So I suppose we need to apply it before the array. That's odd. I usually don't do that. Oh well, it's fine, because at the end of the day, this poly count for a very large road mesh is very much acceptable. It's not a lot of polygons. So in this case, I messed something up. I forgot how to center the thingy. Yeah, navigating in Blender is it's always been pretty difficult, but I know my ways. Using the numpad, for example, to do movements like this quickly, and one of the best ways to move is to just click somewhere and press the delete key on the numpad. It'll just go to it. So if I want to like center my view on that thing, I just press delete and it just goes. Anyways, so here we go. We're gonna add I guess we go here and we add a path. Now the path is a complicated object. I don't fully understand how it how it works to this day. You don't have to position it anywhere too important as long as it's somewhat centered. And moving it in world space versus edit space is very different. I'm going to only move it in edit space, not going to be rotating it in object space. But so here I have the path, and usually though this path has like little arrows to it. Not sure why it's not showing up, but regardless, I'm gonna go to edit mode. I'm gonna rotate it, and my best advice that I can give is that it starts with those 4 dots over here. Don't remove them at any cost. I'm not sure why, but if you do remove them, something goes wrong. So just keep them there. Oh yeah, and the arrows usually tell the direction of the spline. Right now, I don't know the direction of the spline or the path. It's a spline, but And anyways, over here, first we can go over here and check the preview resolution of it. It does have a resolution. I do believe if you take this over here, we can reduce its resolution. And this is going to apply to what modifies our tracks. I usually just put it to the max. And there's also like twist method and all that stuff, but there's no need to consider that for now. No, that's... I always get the axes mixed up. Yeah, okay. Let's flatten it. Okay, so we click on the road. We go to everything. Add a curve modifier. Let's put it... It has to be before decimate. Wait, yeah, no, this is wrong. Array has to go like here. And then decimate comes after, which means this is going to get fixed eventually. Anyways, so here we click on the path. And now it's all completely wrong. So what do we do for this? Well, I usually just rotate this in object space so it matches our road. In this case, I'm rotating the spline itself. You can already see the lag. In this case, I press R and then minus 90 degrees. That rotates at 90 degrees. And then I go to edit mode and I move it the same way. Now it's facing the correct direction. Now, if we start moving it, you can start to see that the UVs are in the correct place. And not only that, but our poly count is staying somewhat correct. Now, I guess if we enable the subsurf modifier, it's slowing down quite a bit, but we'll get a higher poly count where it's needed. And this depending on the game that you're making, you might need this. I can speak more on poly count later. At the moment, we're gonna keep it pretty low. And because at the end of the day, sometimes you might need the high poly count. Like for collision, and sometimes I just go with the collision. Anyways, I'm getting too ahead of myself. I shouldn't speak on it just yet. In this case, we're removing the decimate just so it moves faster. Decimate modifier is very heavy. If I remove it suddenly, everything works a lot better. In this case, let's work without the decimate modifier, and then we'll see to it later. So we're gonna start just making our own track. So we can go up and down. And now we already have a bit of a tilt in here. But anyways, that's fine. One thing though to know about curves like this is that if you do a turn like this, and then you do it again, you extrude it at once, and then twice, and then 3 times, you can see how it changed, right? And that's just a feature of those sorts of roads. If you have it just once, and you want to make it more straight, usually you create my points. And yes, you can subdivide them like that. But also, when you do the path, or you do a ramp like this, and you go sideways, you can see that the road has turned. Now, this curve has a thing over here. You can see that there's a mean weight. Don't really know what it does, but whatever. Mean radius, which is this. Don't recommend using it. It will screw with your UVs, especially if you have decimate modifier on. It will screw with them significantly. Let me just add a little bit more. So yeah, that's not a good look for it. But let's see, if we go back here, if we take this back and just go the mean radius back to 1, and here as well, usually your UV should go back to normal. Yes, did the decimate modifier get worse in the newer version of Blender? Maybe nobody knows. But still, and usually what I like to do to get the decimate modifier correctly is to twist my track. Either that or to go to it again and... Oh, I don't have it set to UVs. Oh, I am a dumbass. Oh. Anyways, some of those problems are still very much real. But stuff like this happens. If you adjust the radius, right now everything's working fine. I suppose they got it correctly then. But there used to be some pretty bad problems with using this method. In this case, you can check the poly count. It is stronger where it's supposed to be. which is exactly what we need. But in this case, I suppose if we tone it down and then also add more of these. Oh, it's working mostly fine. Oh no, you can see it. Notice there's a zigzag pattern going on here in this thing. It's somewhat harder to see. But there's a bit of a zigzag pattern going on in the inner line. That's very much what happens when you use this method. But anyways, we can just go back and set the main radius to 1. And it depends on the point you're touching. But anyways, we're gonna make a track real quick. And yes, you need to set it to UVs. I don't know why I did that. Sometimes clicking out boundaries might do you some good, but I'm not sure if it'll do it this time. So let's go and just screw around. Obviously, tilt. Yeah, it does that. So let's just make something. And I'll just show you how I make a track usually. Making loop-de-loops is a little difficult. It's hard just to model them to begin with, but like getting a loop-de-loop to be perfect is like almost an impossibility. You just have to guess as best as you possibly can. So in this case, it's not the best, but it is something. There is some setting where you can adjust to, so you don't have to like add multiple points at the end of a spline in order to, yes, see how it's altering it? If I add more points in here, it changes that. That's just kind of how it works. But yeah, so let's just finish up the track. And shouldn't be big deal. Yeah. One thing to know is that if you do make it too tight, that will happen. And yeah, that's very much normal. Let's increase the... Actually, no, let's leave it like this for now. And then we can just make those curves a little better by increasing some tilt. Just doing it's like roller coaster design. If you ever played Roller Coaster Tycoon or like Planet Coaster or something like that, it's very much like designing a roller coaster in a way. So yeah, yeah, you can press Control F on Blender to fly around. This is a fun thing to do. Just gotta look at your track. Yeah, and you can check on the poly count. If you want to reduce it significantly, you can up this up to like 5 degrees, but then you might get some other issues. Yeah, in this case, it is very much lower. Just go back to 2. In this case, it's still 3,000 polys for, or faces for this is not a big deal. Now, I want to add other assets to this. How do I do that? So let's try that. First of all, let's duplicate the track. If I try to move it around now, look at what happens. It's still the same track. It's still attached to the spline. It's still doing everything. But one thing that I can do, for example, so I'm gonna model something real quickly. Let's actually delete this. Add a cube. Let's just assign it to this material. And let's just reset and do something like this. This looks terrible for now, but what we can do is that we can like move it like over here, let's say. Let me rotate it so the arrow points in the correct direction. And on the array modifier, getting a little lost, we can increase the distance, or maybe we even put it like this, and then click on one of the faces, do this, push it, move it, and now we have like sort of a light post going around the track. And we can move it around too, but I would recommend moving around at certain axes. Like if you press G and then X, it only moves in the X axis. in case you can press G and Y, and it only moves it in the Y-axis. So it can have something only exists in a specific part of the track. And what I wanted to show was something like this. Let's say we get the track, make another track, and we move it all the way over here. In this case, there is no good solution to this. Sometimes I use a mesh to bridge the gap between both of them, but the only real way is by holding Shift and clicking this. We can get them as close as possible to the point where they're not noticeable. Depending on your game's collision system, this might create problems though. But still, for example, in this case, let's take this. Let's say this is a section where you can fall off. So we're going to be removing this thing. And let's say we'll replace it. Let's remove some of the polys we don't want. And let's replace this with a different material. The one that has the X on it. Let's just keep it like that. It's all the way over there. But anyways, yeah. No, there's that. Granted, you're gonna get stuff like this. There's a gap in here. And you can just, what I actually recommend is to just model something here. Just put something in there. If you have objects loose or something like that, or anything that you could add to your tracks, just add it in there. Could have collision, may not have collision. Just give something just to hide those flaws. And now we have 2 track pieces. If you want the track to actually shorten or become a different length, like one of the things you can technically do is you take this thing, you lower the count, and let's say we apply the array modifier. It always gives a bit of an error, but so here we want to edit it, and it's all the way over there. There's a way to keep it over there, and here in the curve modifier we select those 2 over here, and now they stay over here. Granted, editing may not work as expected. Our arrow is still all the way over there. And in this case, let's take off the decimate modifier so we can use it. Yeah, but now we try to move it, and it goes all sorts of weird ways. So you may not want to do this. In this case, I'm not going to use this. Let's remove this, let it go all the way over there. So it's straight, and it's easier to edit. In this case, we can take off this bit over here. Let's add a loop cut in here. And let's remove this so we can make a gap on the track. Yeah, that's not gonna work too well. Oh well, I'm just being lazy and making a face has all sorts of weird triangles. Actually, no, that's not even that bad. If the player is not gonna notice it, then who cares? So over here, I'm just gonna do a project from view. Yeah, that's fine. And then I'm using the wrong texture in here to map the wrong UV, but yeah, that's fine. We go back in here, and our road has a little gap in it. And if we want to go back to the original, we grab this, G, X, wait, Y. Almost. It almost said GX. But anyways, yeah. And then we align it. Do our best to make sure that it works without any sort of Z fighting. If you do it too much, you get Z fighting. It's a little harder to notice, but well, and actually no, it's not hard to notice at all. You could totally see it over there. But anyways, yeah, so this should be fine. Now, here's the tricky part. There is no correct solution to this. So I'm just going to show what I usually do. And that's finishing the track. Sometimes you get lucky, but most of the time you won't. So here we have it. And we want to connect back to it. There is a way to make this a closed spline. I believe there's a setting somewhere where you can click where it is closed. I don't know where it is, but that's not that's not what we're gonna do anyways. So let's just do it in a raw way by hand. So we do it like this. X 0. So in this case, I have perfectly centered those 4 dots. And you have to do this because if there is just one, suddenly the spline is curving a little bit. Because if there is just one, it's a... Well, it is working off the bat, but if you do it with more, it'll straighten it out. So what I like to do is that I would do my best to align them. My absolute best. It will not work well. This just straight up will not work well. So we just align it as best as we can, and now we lower the array count so we can get it to match somewhat. Let's have it overlapping just a bit. Okay, this is pretty bad, right? It looks almost convincing, but you can see that you know, the meshes are overlapping each other. Things are not quite correct. If you look closer, there are gaps. There are gaps within the geometry and everything. So what I like to do, there's many ways to do this, but we can duplicate the actual road. We can take off the array and modifiers, even decimate. We put another pseudo road on top of it. Sort of like a shell that's encapsulating both of them. We make it a little bit wider and thicker than the other ones. And it's sort of like a patch that will keep both of them together. In this case, it is a little tough because I made the beginning of part of the road a little weird. And yes, if you move a little bit of the beginning, it's going to change everything else. There's nothing you can do about that unless you use another spline. You can make tracks out of multiple splines. This is totally doable, especially when you want to add multiple paths. In this case, I want to straighten that, so I'm going to add more. I'll move this. Also, moving that absolutely changed. Just that little thing changed everything. It's unfortunate, but just keep it in mind. And at the end of the day, if the track changed by just a little bit, it's usually not a big deal. You can go back and look to the track and do that. At the end of the day, it's very easy to edit a piece of the track by just doing this. Changing the tilt does, though, it doesn't actually change anything else. Like, this is safe to change. You can select multiple of them. But what you can't do is select multiple of them and set them to 0. They won't be 0, both of them. Not always, at least. I've had experiences where if one has higher tilt than the other and you set both of them to 0, this one is 71 and that one is negative 71. They turn out to be wrong numbers. So you would have to click every single one of them and set them to a specific value. But anyways, over here, let's take care of our patch. We move these up. And I mean, the tracks are already very poorly aligned to begin with, and we've moved some stuff, so probably going to have to adjust this. C does this, by the way. You press the letter C. At least in the older Blender, I'm not sure what the shortcut has changed. I use an older set of shortcuts, which you can change in the menus. But anyways, here we have it. Here we have our patch. And what I then do is that I sort of merge them together sort of like this. It's not perfect. You know, if I'm working more professionally to make a really good track, I try to make this patch as invisible as I can. It's often not, but I try. And yeah, so I'm just gonna sort of leave it half finished because just a tutorial really. But yeah, and you know, there is a little bump in here. You can minimize this bump by just editing the track. And yeah, now it's a lot better. And we have a complete track. So this is fundamentally the method that I use for making tracks. It's incredibly versatile, and you can do a lot with it. Oh, and probably forgot to mention one thing. If you want to not make your tracks just this sort of stuff, you want to have, let's say, a piece of grass over this area, right? There is no easy solution for that. It's not, there just isn't any. So what you do is that I'm going to save this and put it somewhere else in a new collection, and I'm going to disable that collection so we only have this. I'm going to apply the array and apply the curve. We only have decimate now. So let's say we want to add a little bit of grass over here. Let me delete these vertices. And we do the traditional way. Now the track is applied. We change the spline. Nothing changes. It's basically like you have to be sure that this is going to be it. And then, well, here we go. It's 3D modeling all the way. Right? I mean, this is not a great way of doing this, but the decimate modifier will take care of it. And I suppose I can also add somewhat of a grass texture to this, just because. Just make it green. Like a darkish green. Assign. And there we go. There's no grass in there. In some racing games, because the grass is like a different type of material and you want to have collision with it and you have your vehicle interact differently, sometimes the grass is a different mesh entirely, so you just have to separate it. There's many ways of doing this. You could technically model it over the spline. You could come here with a, let's say, you could come to any other part, like let's say over here, you create a plane and then you stick it out, and then there is your grass, and maybe you twist the track a little more. Way I already applied it. Yeah, it's a little tough to modify the mesh once you've done this. Although there's always proportional editing, which will do something, but it's not great. It'll change the mesh, but it's not gonna. It ain't great. It ain't great. I'll just say that. I mean, this is a weird track. But yeah. And yeah, like I usually don't go for this. I just have a floating piece of track. I don't by the way, if you want to know, when it comes to track supports, not a good idea to use something like this, let's say. Because if you then look at the track, look at the supports. It's all screwed up. Usually it's best to just model them individually and place them manually. Even light posts, it might not be a good idea. Granted, light posts are usually a fairly small thing. You can always do something like a little tunnel. Oh, whoops. And that's usually fine. Granted, it does get a little bit deformed when you get to corners and things like that, but that is something you can do. And yeah, like this is, at the end of the day, what I probably should be summarizing and saying that is that making a racetrack for a video game is 3D modeling. There's no getting around it. You have to learn 3D modeling, and you have to learn the nooks and crannies of 3D modeling and Blender. I've heard Maya is very expensive, but Blender is a free option, so it's what I go for. So I might as well. In this case, yeah. It is also worth noting that, as far as I can tell, spline add-ons for video games and stuff like that, they programmatically generate a spline via using code. But one of the problems with that is that spline may be generated as an instance, or as in it's generated when you load in the level, which can be a good and a bad thing depending on what type of game you're making. If the spline in this case is just a a 3D model that's loaded in, well, game engines are very good at loading 3D models, so it's not really a problem. The collision of it can be the same as the mesh, the visible mesh, or in this case we could have another mesh duplicated, and then we finally turn on our subdivision surface, and we have a higher resolution collision. Granted, it's already taking quite a bit just to process those things anyways, and like reduce this, and we could use the subdivided one as a collision mesh, and using the other one as, you know, the actual visible mesh. I don't really usually do this, but you know, I try to find a balance between both and just go with that. Regardless, there was something else I forgot to mention. Yeah, I forgot. Anyways, I think that's it. If there's any more questions, I might make a follow-up video. So feel free to ask, and thank you for watching.